Hey guys, Luca here, Studio DMI with MyMixLab. Today, something special. We're talking about a plugin that we really love. It's called Diamond Dynamic Saturator by Acustica Audio and Studio DMI. I'm gonna take you guys through a little journey of understanding the plugin, play with, give you my take on this plugin. All right, just follow me. All right, Diamond Dynamic Saturator. Finally, we have an actual saturation plugin, part of the Diamond family. I'm gonna just play with the plugin, give you some example on stereo bass, on synth, on drum bass, and just take a moment every time that we play with the plugin to analyze certain aspects of the plugin, dive a little bit as a tutorial part of the plugin, and just share with you guys my kind of like approach and the way I like to use it, and what kind of option this plugin offers to us, all right? All right, let's play some music. And before we do that, let's start from a default preset. So default preset on DDS is essentially everything flat, 1K to 20K, with a touch of expansion, ready for us to saturate, okay? And we have three types of densities. So as a default, we have density 1, saturation 0 on 1 and 2, and we have expansion, again, ready for apply expansion on saturation. On stereo bass, however, I like to stay on static mode. Reason why, I want to be creative as far as expansion on the drums, but not necessarily on the stereo bass. So we're going to start on a static mode where the expansion now it's off, essentially, and we're going to just do some color, create some color and tone to the stereo bass. I'm going to start looping, and I'm going to start to apply a little bit of saturation, gain staging, and see what kind of result we're getting. All right, let's go. Let's start with linear phase mode. Really nice. So what is the goal on any and every Diamond plugins is to be quick, get to the best result in a matter of seconds. This happening with the color EQ, with lift, with transient, and now with dynamic saturator. So you want to be able to just move knobs, trust your feelings, and just get the sound. In my ad is how I can just bring the mid-range and the upper mid-range and move more in front of the mix, without changing the tonal balance using an EQ. I just want to create harmonics that give you kind of like the effect of an EQ, but without changing, again, level-wise, certain frequency. I just go full range, in this case, up to 20K. I turn off the low crossover point to make sure that I go all the way to the bottom on the stereo bass. Then I use the makeup gain as wet and dry. So I'm able to kind of like blend how much saturation I want to, again, blend into the stereo bass. And then I have, of course, a final output level to give me as a gain stage opportunity into the next plugin. So after I find the sweet spot between, again, saturation 1, which is more low, I would say the saturation 1 has a more consistent bottom end versus saturation 2 as a more upper mid-range, I think, content. Now, when I blend the two, I compensate with any low end that I might losing with kind of like a tilt effect using the low shelf. Now I'm blending the overall saturation, okay? Then when I feel that I'm satisfied with the result, I might test to turn on and off the saturation, which is the little red diamond here. What it does, it just turn off the two saturation circuit, or I just simply use my internal bypass to bypass with or without the plugin to make sure that the output gain remain the same. This is a very manual plugin. There's nothing goes on autopilot. We don't have auto makeup gain. It's very manual. It's almost like a raw saturation piece of art that you have in front of you on a plugin format. So, okay, let's do some A and B. It's interesting how all the mid-range feels more in front just because we are creating essentially new harmonics. They're not existing on the original track. So very effective to do that. Now, part of the dynamic saturation approach is to be flexible, to be used on individual stems, buses, stereo bus, or drum bus. So my natural progression going from stereo bus is going one step before the stereo bus into the drum bus and do something different where the stereo bus give like a tone and color of the overall stereo bus of the song. Now with the drum bus, what we're looking to do is to create some expansion, to have the drums just give some movement, especially on the mid-range. We wanted the mid-range to have a certain movement. All right, let's focus on that. So when I play with the drums, focus on the drums. We listen the entire song, but just focus on the drums, specifically on the claps, the snare, and the kick. And the level of expansion, especially density 1, when we have Arnie, is a little snappy. He has a more like a fast envelope as far as like attack with a fast decay time, give you a sense of, again, rhythm and then more transient response, I feel. So let's focus on that. I can also go more on mid expansion and saturation versus side, which is very useful for pads and synth and other material. But for drum bass, I might want to consider to just go more on the mid. So the MS function on DDS, extremely powerful because essentially you are driving saturation. You can blend more on mid versus the side or vice versa. Listen, the hats tone on the mid range, how good is that? All right, what about if we try to bypass now both plugins? Let's close the plugin for a second. So we have stereo bus here, and we have a drum bus here. And as a test, let's just bypass both. Let's see how we're doing. To be fair, let's gain stage the output to make sure there is not a bump of level. So let's go A and B between the two. I'll pull this down a little bit so we see when they're on and off. Very nice. So if you go for extreme saturation, please always remember to use linear phase. If you are ready to render the audio to export, you might want to consider to go on oversampling, especially drums and stereo bus, to make sure that we're not creating aliasing, which is a very unnecessary, and we can avoid it. Since we have drums, which is very, very clear what expansion is doing, let's check the difference of density, which is, again, different attack, release, and knee of the expansion. So let's analyze the three type of density, which is the three type of expansion that we have. So it's a progression between a middle where the knee is as like almost between softer harmony, very natural expansion. 2 is snappier. 3, it's smooth. It's like a vari-mu emulation. So let's find out. I feel the density 3 is great in case of stereo bus, on synth guitars, when you want to have like a more control expansion, not snappy, you don't want to change too much the envelope. I feel the 2 is aggressive, great on snare, on kick drum probably. I feel for drums, number 1 is probably the best option. Now you start to get into the mindset of expansion and saturation. Let's see if we reduce saturation now and we still expanding without like less high frequency. So check it out. Let's go to 13K. That's my favorite. Now, the reason why we add a low shelf, which is post-saturation, is because the perceived saturation on the upper mid-range, it gives you a feeling of losing low end. You have almost like a tilt effect. So be able to have a clean, nice bottom end, you can blend up to 6 dB, I think is very useful. On the other end, if you do a lot of like lower mid-range saturation, it's nice to pull some low end out. So that's like the approach and use of the low shelf, which is like, again, post-saturation. When you're pushing low end, it's clean low end, okay? So, and again, the bypass, we have 2 stages. We have a full bypass of the plugin, and you have a bypass of the 2 saturation module, okay? So I think we find our sweet spot on the drums. I really like this. All right, let's dive into synth and guitar. Let's solo for a second. Let's see how we can use Diamond Dynamic Saturator as a borderline sound design plugin, okay? I really like what it does to the sides. And again, if you're going more into side saturation, I don't want to say 100% saturation on the side, but you go between 50 to 75, you cannot get this nice harmonics on the side that make the song or the synth, in this case, very open. And for synth, I recommend to use saturation 2 more than saturation 1. You can choose between, I think, density 1 or 3. And then by taste, you can give more expansion or less expansion versus static saturation. So let's blend with drums. Let's try to go full range. Oh yeah, let's go for the full chorus part with everything else. Let's go back to crossover point. Yeah, it's magic on the side. The saturation, especially high quality saturation that we have now on the synths, it's a big impact. The plugin, it's versatile, so you can go from stereo bus approach with almost like a mastering mindset to almost sound design mindset to use on synth and guitar. You can reshape kick drum. But I just want to give you guys an overall like look of the plugin from my point of view. Just a couple of other things I want you guys to check and maybe do some homework and try yourself on the plugin is the input trim actually has an interesting effect. When you go negative, you can kind of like flip and start to compress. I want you guys to try that. It's very, very effective. All right, guys, little recap on the plugin, especially on the metering. We have the mid meter, the side meter. We have the virtual tube in the middle to give you a good indication of saturation. We have level of expansion that apply only on density 1, 2, and 3. If you are on static, don't be surprised if the expansion is off because it's actually static, it's bypassing the expansion. Okay, that's important to remember. Remember, linear phase, very important, especially on complex materials like drums or stereo bus. I strongly recommend to use a linear phase. This is super high quality. You're gonna avoid phase shifting, especially saturation will tend to amplify phase shifting a lot. Another important note, the low shelf, it's a clean 90 to 100 hertz low-end bump that you wanna apply post-saturation when you have almost like a tilt effects caused by upper mid-range saturation. So the low shelf will kind of rebalance the mix and give like a clean bottom end in an open saturated mid-range. Try to do a good job gain staging. Remember, when you're pushing the input, you need to manually reduce the output. Also, this is a great opportunity to decide how loud you want to go on into the next plugin. In case of lift, in case of fire the clip, in case of any other plugin, you want to use this as an opportunity to gain stage into the next plugin. And then I recommend to do an experiment on where you're going to apply density on what kind of material. If you go for transients like drums, percussion, you might want to consider number 1. If you go for individual sounds like kick, snare, you want to consider number 2. Very aggressive. You're able to reshape the attack of the transient really well. Number 3 for like mastering or like smooth synth, piano, and guitars. Remember, the presets have 2 presets folders inside of the main folder. You have 10 presets as a factory preset, which is something that I designed for general use, plus the default settings. And you have Massive, which is the translation of my mixdown work on Drake Massive, which this plugin is heavily inspired by. And I recreate the preset from that song. All right, guys, Luca here at Studio DMI. Just a quick tutorial today about Diamond Dynamic Saturator. Hope to see you next time on MyMixLab. Bye-bye.